All right, y'all, let's get into it. We are listening to Labyrinth, audiobook by Randall Sullivan. Man, this is really good, dog. It's about the Tupac and Biggie and the whole Death Row East Coast, West Coast 90s bad boy feud that went on back in the day. And they got really good details. Let's go ahead and dive into it, guys. Hit the thumbs up button.
Chapter 8. The biggest difference between the informants who implicated Suge Knight in the killing of Biggie Smalls and those who pointed blame toward the Crips, Russell Poole had noticed, were that the former gave their names. This alone did not make such witnesses credible, of course. 4 of the
Mm,
6 identified informants who had implicated Knight in Biggie's murder, in fact, were behind bars.
mm,
The first was an inmate at LA County's Wayside Detention Center named Wayman Anderson, who is better
mm,
known as Suave, the name under which he had recorded for Capitol Records as an R&B singer.
mm.
Anderson was now serving what amounted to a life sentence after being convicted of an arson murder in 1994.
Oh, damn.
On April
Like,
4th, 1997, Anderson had told Wilshire detectives that Knight had offered him a contract on the rapper's life. The tip produced a flurry of
mm,
activity, including a lie detector test administered to Anderson. Ultimately, detectives concluded that Anderson probably knew something about the murder of Biggie Smalls, but that he
how he knew
couldn't
he
be
was in
relied
prison?
upon as a witness in court. Only a short
In
time
prison.
later, a county jail inmate named Anthony Sutphin, an employee of Death Row Records prior to his incarceration, told detectives he was one of Suge Knight's closest associates and could provide them with evidence that Biggie Smalls had been murdered by members of Suge's goon squad.
Mm,
Detectives assigned to investigate Sutphin's story soon found their way to a young woman who told them that she had been the object of a romantic rivalry between Anthony and Suge's personal bodyguard, Aaron Palmer, better known as Heron. She chose Heron, the young man said, after he told her that Sutphin was nothing more than a water boy at death row. A
mm.
short time later, the two men had a violent argument, the young woman said, and when Heron backed Sutphin down, Anthony had come up with a story for the police that would implicate Suge's man in the murder of Biggie Smalls.
Mm.
A slightly more persuasive account of Biggie's slaying was offered by an inmate at Corcoran Prison. This man said that Marcus Nunn, a mob Piru blood who shared a cell with him at the time of Biggie Smalls' murder, had confided that Suge hired another mob Piru to take the rapper out. The
Mm.
Corcoran inmate also claimed to know who had killed Tupac Shakur and said Suge had been behind that also.
Damn.
This
Oh
was
no.
all, at best, secondhand information, however, and Marcus Nunn denied everything.
Yeah, that was the rumor everybody was going around saying that Suge had Tupac set up because he was getting ready to leave Death Row. But that was further from the truth. Why would you have them shoot at yourself? He was in the line of fire, you
A
know.
Los Angeles County jail inmate who gave only his first name, Devin, phoned the management company of Biggie's ex-girlfriend Lil Kim after reading an article about the singer in People magazine, and said he knew for certain that the killer of Biggie Smalls was a Bloods gang member who had received $50,000 for the job from David
Mm.
Kenner. The shooter had fled to Chicago
David Penn?
immediately after the killing, Devin said, but now was back in LA and working at Death Row Records. The problem
Mm.
for LAPD investigators was that Devin had identified the killer only as Willie Williams. When Poole ran the name through the LAPD computer, hundreds of convicted criminals with that name popped up on screen.
Oh, man.
2 current Death Row Records employees, one male, the other female, had contacted the LAPD during the first week after Biggie Smalls' death with information that linked the record label to the murder. That the two provided their names, addresses, and phone numbers made them at least interesting to the Wilshire detectives. Kelly
Mm.
Cooper, the black detective who had headed up the Smalls murder investigation during its first month, noted that he had been unable to find even a single death row employee who would talk about the beating death of Kelly Jamerson back in 1995. These two
Mm.
witnesses could not offer anything close to what would provide probable cause for an arrest, however. The male employee said he had heard Suge Knight boast about arranging Biggie's murder, while the female employee told police that she believed David Kenner had actually arranged the hit, and that she could provide information that Kenner was a major drug dealer. In the end, detectives concluded that the woman's evidence was entirely circumstantial, and that the man's would be thrown out in court as hearsay. Suge's rapper DJ Quik, who many in the LAPD believed should have been charged with the murder of Kelly Jamerson, was briefly a
Wow.
suspect in the Smalls murder. Quik had shown up at the Peterson Museum party accompanied by 10 Bloods, and the day after Biggie's death, several witnesses reported hearing him say, "Fat motherfuckers should not have been out here in the first place." Detectives received the tip that Quik's most trusted bodyguard drove a black Impala SS, but when LAPD officers attempted to locate the man, they learned he recently had been murdered in what appeared to be a home
Oh,
invasion robbery. A
what?
series of other promising leads took detectives nowhere. During July of
So
1997,
wait a minute. So one of DJ Quick's associates was he was linked to the Biggie Small murders, and then the dude that was associated that drove the Impala, he was murdered in a home invasion. Hmm.
the house in Woodland Hills, where Suge kept his girlfriend Stormy Random and the child he had fathered by her, was burglarized. Soon after this, Kenneth Knox informed Poole that the young woman's mother, Patricia Wright, only recently had been arrested in another home leased by Knight for the gruesome 1981 murder of her then husband, Willie Jerome Scott, whose body was found in an abandoned motor home with a large knife buried in his chest. An
Whoa.
informant who came forward 15 years after the fact told police that Patricia Wright and
This stuff is deep with Death Row, man. That company was shade. That company was a man.
her lover had killed the man to collect his life insurance. Detectives, for a time, thought they might use the pending murder charge to pressure either Wright or her daughter into cooperating with them. But in the end, neither woman gave them anything they could use against Suge Knight. A call from an ATF agent in San Diego who gave his name as John McNeil and said he had compelling evidence that MC Hammer had killed Biggie Smalls for Suge Knight
Oh, oh
intrigued
wow.
detectives, until they learned that the ATF had no agents named John McNeil in California. Some clues were simply puzzling. A former PR man for Death Row Records
They was trying to blame it on Hammer. They was trying to say Hammer killed Biggie. Oh my.
reported that his home in Louisiana had been burglarized, but that the thief took only some canisters of film he had shot while promoting the rapper Nate Dogg.
Hmm.
Many of the most intriguing clues connected to the murder of Biggie Smalls involved the theory that his killer had been either a black Muslim or someone dressed like one. A security guard who had been posted at the main entrance to the Peterson Museum on the night of the Vibe party told detectives that just before the party began, he had spoken to a pair of men he believed were Muslims. Both sported short, fade haircuts, the security guard said, and one wore an electric blue suit. One of the videotapes seized from the museum's surveillance cameras had caught the image of a Muslim in a suit and bow tie standing just outside the front entrance with two other black males. There was
Wow.
the odd story, attested to by several witnesses, that Puffy Combs had been accosted by a Muslim at a restaurant in Century Plaza only a couple of days before Biggie's killing. When the man began to berate Puffy for how he had treated the Muslims in New York, witnesses said, Mustafa Farrakhan was forced to intervene. On the other hand, detectives from the LAPD, Compton PD, and Inglewood PD all reported recent robberies and shootings in which the suspects had posed as Muslims in order to obtain access to private residences.
Hmm.
By far the most compelling claim of a Muslim connection to the murder of Biggie Smalls, however, and perhaps the best clue received by detectives involved in the Smalls murder investigation, had come from a jail inmate described by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department as an ultra-reliable informant. This man
Hmm.
already had solved 2 homicide cases for them, sheriff's deputies explained. The shooter in the Smalls case had been a contract killer who was a member of the Fruit of Islam, the sheriff's informant told the LAPD, and went by the name Amir or Ashmir. He had been told that the killing was ordered by Suge Knight, the informant said, and that it had something to do with the death of Tupac Shakur. Suge Knight now was among the numerous inmates at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo who professed a devotion to Islam. Practice of his religion had become rather difficult for Suge, however. Sentenced
What?
by Judge Chuliger to serve the full 9 years of his sentence for the assault on the Stanley brothers at the Solar Record Studios, Suge entered the men's colony in June of 1997 and immediately was awarded a plum assignment to the prison's yard detail.
Hmm.
After the LAPD named him as a suspect in the murder of Biggie Smalls, though, Knight had
Hmm.
been moved to administrative segregation. The prison's administration at the same time posted one of the LAPD's wanted posters looking for information about Biggie's killing in the module where Suge was housed. As an ad-seg inmate, Suge received his meals in a cell he was permitted to leave only for showers and so-called non-contact meetings, where he was separated by a thick glass wall from his visitors, who were shuttled daily to the prison in a blood-red limousine. Without
What?
Knight's presence in Los Angeles, though, Death Row Records was rapidly becoming a shell of its former self. The label's first release after his incarceration, The Lady of Rage's Necessary Roughness, was a flop, and Snoop
Mm.
Dogg's disaffection from the label was becoming increasingly obvious. Death Row insiders also suggested that Suge had fallen out with David Kenner. Those who had been named as the temporary heads of Death Row Records in Suge's absence included not only Norris Anderson and Reggie Wright Jr., but also Sharitha Knight and the singer Michelle A., who, despite being the mother of one of Dr. Dre's children, had taken to identifying herself as Suge's wife and was
Wow.
ensconced in Knight's old office at Interscope. No one doubted that Suge was still running things, of course. Despite the mountain of bad press he had received in recent months, the media's attack on Knight seemed to be softening. The attorney Suge hired to defend him against the government's racketeering investigation, Milton Grimes, had struck an effective blow by asking why the IRS and FBI were focusing entirely on Mr. Knight, while his corporate masters at Interscope, Time Warner, MCA, and EMI went unquestioned. Interscope, which had settled its share of Afeni Shakur's racketeering lawsuit with a payment of $3 million, plus the promise of royalties from posthumous albums created from Tupac's unreleased recordings, remained in business with Death Row, while MCA and its parent company, Seagram's, pocketed their share of the profits. Time Warner, whose CEO had announced the company's decision to sell its share in Interscope by declaring, "If music is distributed in our name, we must bear responsibility for that music," quietly retained control of Death Row's music publishing rights worldwide.
Wow.
EMI already had paid a reported $50 million for a half interest in Priority Records, a company that distributed many of Death Row's albums, and was angling to purchase the gangsta rap label outright. As such facts were contemplated in a series of newspaper articles published in Los Angeles during the second half of 1997, the revisionist history of Suge Knight advanced to the point that one article quoted an entertainment lawyer who said, "Suge was no different than any of the other head honchos in this business. There is a
Mm.
formula, and he understood it. You step on others' backs to get where you need to go."
That's crazy, man. That's the American way. You step on others' backs to get where you need to go. Unfortunately, you know, it doesn't have to be that way, but insecure people make it that way, and people who don't have the wherewithal to have faith and grind. But anyway, it's another story. What do y'all think about this, man? Labyrinth by Randall Sullivan. Leave your comments and go ahead and check it out. It's on Audible. And if y'all want to check it out, leave your comments. What y'all think about what y'all just heard? Um, Suge, man, he was a real. He really thought he was Don Corleone, huh? It's crazy. Anyway, check y'all later.